Hello and welcome to a tutorial on managing provider earnings. Now, tracking what treatments a provider has performed and then monitoring whether those treatments have been paid by the patient or not has been made very simple in the Bridget software. To do it, we first of all need to go to the Finances section of the program, which we can get to either by hovering over our tile on the main page, or we can simply select Finances on the left hand side of the screen. And then we simply choose Manage Provider Earnings. So you'll see at the top of this list all of the providers that work for the practice, and we can manage each of these providers separately. Now, for this tutorial we're going to select Dr. Michael Smith, since he's the principal dentist in this example. So we can see some previous calculations we've done in the past, and we've come up to 31st of December 24. So now we're going to calculate our earnings starting from the 1st of the 1st, 2025. Now, the first thing to notice is the earnings range at the top here. Now, the start date will always be the date after the previous earnings period has been calculated. So this prevents the practice from accidentally missing any days that the provider has worked and then leaving those dates unpaid. But we can change the end date to whatever we like, and as we do so we will see the earnings figures getting updated in real time. So for example, you can see the whole month of January being covered here, but if I go back to, for example, the 27th, we can see our figures changing here. If I go to the 28th, again it's adjusting our figures to compensate for the date range that we've currently selected. Now, generally the date range will be from the start of the month up to the end of the month, but of course you can choose for yourself how often you want to perform this calculation and pay your providers on a weekly basis if you prefer. So let's go through each of these fields on our earnings by provider dialog. The first one is total amount earned during the selected period. And if I hover over the figure, it will show us in the tooltip this is the total invoice treatment amount performed by this provider. So a total of £5,769.15 has been done by the provider and has been charged to the patient. The second row down, total amount of earnings paid up to the end of this period. So again, if I just bring up the tooltip, it says the invoice treatments amount that has been paid up to the date of this calculation. So although £5,769 has been charged to the patient, currently only £4,924 has been physically paid by the patient. Then we have this field, total paid amount carried forward from previous months. So these are calculations from previous months which are affecting this month. We'll come back to that a bit later. And then any refunds that have been issued that may affect our calculations. And then at the bottom here we have the total amount to base the provider's payment on. So this is the crucial figure, exactly how much we should be paying our provider, or at least giving us a figure to base our payment to our provider on. So this is all well and good, but our question of course is, how has the program arrived at these figures? Well, in order to see how the program has arrived at these calculations, we can press the button View Calculation Details. This will produce a report for us which itemizes exactly how this calculation has been arrived at. Now, the first thing is, notice the keys at the top of the screen. These are very important. We have black rows that are paid, we have blue ones that are outstanding, red meaning voided, green indicating a payment, and grey meaning a negated payment. So this helps us to identify the types of row in our report and how it relates to our overall calculation. Now, probably the principal part of this report is this first section, which is called Provider Earnings. Again, this is simply the amount that has been charged to the patient. Invoices have been given and then hopefully we will see corresponding payments made against those invoice line items. So this is itemizing every treatment that this provider has done, telling us the invoice number, 1594 in this instance, the date on which the invoice was raised, the patient to identify who the treatment was for, the course that it was done on, and then the treatment that was done, as well as the total value of the treatment, and crucially, the paid value of that treatment, how much has actually been paid. And if we go through this report, we can see item by item every treatment that Michael Smith has done over this period of time, extractions, examinations. Here we can see a denture which was for 1,132 for the first stage, but notice there are two individual green payments that have been made towards this, one on the 3rd of December and another one which was obviously an upfront payment because the treatment was done on the 27th of January, and one on the 1st of February. So again, the total amount paid here, 982 and 150, have both covered that overall line item. So these black ones are okay, that we can see clearly that these have been paid, but notice at the top here we've got the blue for outstanding, so it's identifying for us any treatments that this provider has done where clearly no payment has yet been received. So Peter Williams has had an amalgam filling, charged £105, but we haven't received a payment yet. Likewise, James Smith has had an implant plus zirconia crown fit, and we can see that although a certain amount has been charged, only 1,080 has been received so far. So if we go down a bit, we can see the totals of our report. So we can see the provider totals, the total amount earned is 5,769, but the total amount paid is only 4,924. So hopefully you can see we can identify every single payment that has come in and every item that has been charged, and that really helps us to see, make sure we're not missing anything, and really helps us to see how the software has arrived at the provider calculation that it has. So 5769 and 4924. If I just come out of this report, we can go back to our overall figures, and again we'll see those two figures replicated in our boxes here. So what about this third item, total paid amount that has been carried forward from previous months of £150 and 55 pence? Well, again, if I just bring up the tooltip for this box, it says invoice treatment items which were performed in previous months but have only recently been paid. So obviously if treatments had been invoiced in December or in November or previous and had not yet been paid, the provider wouldn't have been paid yet. But apparently those invoices, or some of them, have been paid, and we want to be notified of that so that we can pass that payment on to the provider. So how has the program arrived at this £150.55 carried forward? Again, let's go to our calculation details. We'll go down to this next section of the report, which is called earnings carried forward. And there are three things that we need to be aware of in this section. First of all, red ones, voided invoices, and we also need to be made aware of any outstanding ones and any that have been paid. So we can see here that a previous invoice, which was charged back in December, invoice 1598, has actually been voided. So although we paid our provider based on that invoice that was raised before, now it's been voided, we would need to take off £50.50 because evidently there was some kind of problem, some kind of mistake that was made there. So it's just informing us that we need to take off £50.50 from the payment given to the provider for this month. We can see that from December there was a bridge preparation treatment, or part of it, and that has now been paid this month. So £91.05 has been carried forward onto this report. And then from last month we also have an extraction, and part of that we can see, although the overall charge was £201.50, we can see that £110 has actually been received on the 27th of January. So that's a previous invoice from a previous month, and some of it has been paid in this month. So program is identifying £110 needs to be carried forward. So when we total these, we notice that it comes to £150.55. So that is the carried forward amount from our previous month. So we can see that again highlighted here. Now what about refunds? Well, as it mentions, refunds that are issued are not included in the calculation. Now why are these not included automatically in the financial calculation? Well, it's because basically it's up to the person who's paying the provider as to why the refund has been given. Was it due to a mistake or a problem at the practice or by the provider themselves? Or is it simply a patient that was just very hard to please and really the provider did nothing wrong, but a refund had to be given in those circumstances? Well, if we look at our calculation details, we'll be able to see in the bottom section any refunds that have been issued. And if we've made any notes on our refund when we've been taking it, then that will also be shown against our refund. So we can see in this instance that on the 25th of January, it says the patient is on our in-house plan and they should not have paid for the exam. So they obviously had a free exam in the in-house plan. So as part of this £1,281.40, evidently £51.50 was accidentally paid, and that has been refunded back to the patient. So in this instance, the provider did nothing wrong, so we'll probably continue to pay the provider even though we've refunded the patient £51.50. But there may be circumstances in which you decide that's going to come off of the provider payment for the end of the month. So now we can see how that figure has been arrived at. So now we can either enter the actual amount that we're going to be paying our provider, or if we pay a percentage each month of the amount earned, then we can simply enter the value of the percentage and the software will automatically calculate the amount that we're going to be paying our provider. And at this stage we can make any personal notes that we want to and then save and close. And this locks that period for the chosen provider, so when we want to, we can always go back and check on that figure and see exactly how this calculation was arrived at. We can always go back to the calculation details and it will have saved the report from previously. That will never change, so we always know exactly how we paid that provider and why we paid that specific amount to that provider. So that concludes our tutorial on managing provider earnings. We hope you found it informative and easy to follow.